Initially, I wasn't expecting much from Brix Shooter. It seemed like your run-of-the-mill horizontal spaceship shooting game. The graphic style didn't initially impress me, and I'm not terribly fond of 3D graphics in 2D games. However, I was surprised to find out how enjoyable the game actually turned out to be. The controls are pretty straightforward, as there's only 3 buttons to worry about: a fire button, a special weapon button, which is usually just some kind of bomb that gets rid of bullets, and a collect power-up button. It might seem weird that there's a dedicated button for it, but power-ups aren't so much objective upgrades as they are strategic changes in firepower and armor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, since there were only 3 buttons, I ended up using one of the controllers that came with my Mega Drive Mini, and it worked incredibly well. Sega really knows how to make a good D-pad. At first, Brix plays rather traditionally, shooting enemies to rack up your score and collecting the shiny bits that float across the screen after you kill enemies in order to power up your ship. Unlike most shoot-em-ups, however, Brix doesn't give you 3 lives, but rather 1 life with 3 hit points. The way it shakes things up is in the way that your hit points work. Your ship can only take 3 hits, but if you start sustaining damage, you have the option to switch your ship to another if you come across a capsule. The caveat is that if you do this, your ship goes down to level 1 power and you've got to work to get back up to maximum power. Also, you'll find you're gonna have some ships that you really don't like. For instance, I like to use the Savior because although it isn't very strong, the shield encourages grazing, because each time the shield takes a hit, it fires off a strong homing laser. Not only that, but the special shot creates a shield directly in front of you, pretty much guaranteeing that you won't take damage while it's deployed. The Phoenix, on the other hand, is also weak, but the special shot leaves your front completely vulnerable, making it really hard to deploy in a last-minute effort to avoid damage. The key to Brix Shooter is to experiment with different types of ships and figure out which ones work best for you and against what bosses. The ships that show up are more or less random for what I can tell, so you never really know what you're gonna get, but sometimes you really just need to reset your hit points. There's also special ships that you can unlock after completing certain objectives in the game, which is a nice bonus to work towards. These ships also don't need to be leveled up, and instead of starting off at level 1, they start at level 3, so it's always really helpful to switch to one of them. As far as scoring goes, it seems to be pretty straightforward. Full disclosure, I'm much more of a fan of playing a game for the satisfaction of winning instead of scoring high. From what I can tell, the gems you collect by either killing enemies or using your special to destroy bullets boost your score, and the more gems you have, the higher your score for destroying enemies. As long as you're hitting something, your gem chain won't break, but if you're not hitting anything, it'll slowly start going down, which is a bit of an issue because you can move much faster by not shooting, so you gotta be careful. The first several stages are pretty easy, and a good introduction to how the mechanics of the game work. Around halfway through when the lasers start showing up is where the challenge really starts to pile on. This is also a fairly long game for a shoot 'em up. There's 13 stages, but there's also infinite continues to try and beat them all. If you die, you get sent back to the beginning of the stage, but instead of restarting you with default weapons and resetting your score, you instead get sent back to the same state you were in when you entered the stage. It's kinda like a save state. This means if you entered the stage with 1 point of health and a score of 7 million, that's how it's gonna be when you use a continue. A little bizarre if you ask me, but it works, and it means there isn't really much of a reason to try and 1cc this game unless you're speedrunning it or something. I think the difficulty is handled quite well. The first few levels are pretty easy as I said before, but everything gets slowly harder. I think the third to last boss was actually the hardest, but the last 2 certainly weren't a walk in the park. Halfway through the game starts becoming noticeably harder, very similar to how the Windows Toho games work, where stage 4 always gets really difficult. Speaking of the Toho games, the music, especially the boss theme, which you heard in the intro for this video, remind me a lot of both Toho and Cave Story, oddly enough. Or, in other words, the music is really good. I was surprised to find myself humming some of the tunes as I walked down the street hours after playing. I feel like small projects like this usually have decent music, but this went beyond my expectations. There's not a huge variety in the number of tracks, but what's here is all quality stuff. Unfortunately, there's no sound tests. I miss when games used to have that. From the trailers, I wasn't very impressed with the graphical style of the game, but as I played it, it really grew on me. As I've said before, I don't like 3D models in 2D games usually, but I absolutely love the look of the textureless models, especially contrasted against the almost painting-like backgrounds. The backgrounds are all very imaginative, and it's really nice to see that every single stage has a different backdrop. Brix Shooter also has a story, but it didn't make any sense to me. It's about some prince of Brix, and there's a robot too, and I didn't really see the connection between the story and the gameplay whatsoever. It certainly didn't help that the dialogue isn't written in very good English. Then again, you have the option to just turn it off, so really not that big of a deal, and if anything, it's kind of funny. We've also got some extra difficulty modes for arcade, as well as a challenge mode with something like 30 levels in it. These levels start off much more difficult than the arcade mode, but they can also be played 2-player. 2-player's fun, but your health bar and your special shot charge are shared, making for a bizarre balance to the game. I mean, it works for sure, but it takes a bit of getting used to. I personally don't like the way that it works. I wish we had individual lives and could bring each other back if we survived to the end of a stage. It works well with Steam's online co-op feature though, but I don't foresee myself playing this one too much in multiplayer. I was surprised by Brix Shooter. I didn't expect to have a real desire to go back and play this game as much as I did. It provided a good amount of entertainment and a tough but fair challenge with a system that rewards you for getting to know it. At only $10 on Steam, I highly encourage you to give it a shot. It just might surprise you like it did me. I'm Bofner, and I'll see you all next time!